You are about to witness one of history's most clinically executed campaigns of psychological destruction, a 76-day orchestration of torment that redefined cruelty. Forget the guillotine. That blade was an act of mercy compared to the systematic dismantling of a human soul that preceded it. This is the story of Prisoner 280, a case study in how a state can weaponize a mother's love as its most potent instrument of torture. Our journey begins not with a blade, but with the echo of boots on a stone staircase in the dead of a Parisian night. It is July 3rd, 1793, inside the oppressive medieval keep of the Temple prison. Marie Antoinette, the former Queen of France, sleeps fitfully beside her 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. Her hand rests on the small rise and fall of his chest, a tactile anchor to the only purpose she has left. 6 months prior, she watched as the guillotine took her husband, King Louis XVI. Since that cataclysm, she has not let this boy, the uncrowned Louis XVII, out of her sight, her body a literal shield against the chaos of the revolution. The door to her chamber explodes inward. 6 municipal guards, their faces hard in the flickering candlelight, fill the room. One holds a document, an order from the Committee of Public Safety. They have come for the boy. He is to be taken from his mother's corrupting influence and entrusted to the Republic for re-education. What follows is not the dignified protest of a queen, but the raw, primal eruption of a mother pushed to the edge of existence. For 1 solid hour, the stone walls of the temple reverberate with a sound they have never known. The animalistic screams of a parent fighting for her child. She transforms into a force of nature, hurling her body against the door, physically interposing herself between the guards and her terrified son. She pleads, she begs, she offers herself in his place, her voice shredding into a hoarse whisper. But this is not a moment of impulsive brutality. This is the first move in a calculated strategy. The revolutionaries, through months of surveillance in the temple, had identified her core vulnerability. They understood that physical deprivation, insults, and even the threat of death could be withstood by a woman who had already lost her crown, her status, and her husband. But they discerned that her identity as a mother was her psychological keystone. To break Marie Antoinette, they would not attack her body first. They would annihilate her heart. They would use her own boundless love for her children as the lever to pry her mind apart. And in taking Louis Charles, they were not merely removing a prisoner, they were seizing the primary instrument of her torture. To comprehend the profound cruelty of this act, we must first dismantle the caricature and meet the real woman in the cell. The Madame Deficit of the pamphlets, the Austrian she-wolf of the crowds, was a revolutionary fabrication. She was born Maria Antonia Josefa Johanna in 1755, the youngest daughter of the formidable Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. At 14, she was a pawn on the chessboard of European politics, married to the future Louis XVI to cement an alliance between ancient enemies, Austria and France. She arrived at Versailles a child, awkward and unprepared, her accented French mocked, her every misstep magnified into a scandal by a court that despised her foreignness. Her marriage was a profound personal humiliation, unconsummated for 7 years, a subject of public gossip that left her isolated and adrift. The extravagant persona she cultivated, the towering hairstyles, the lavish fêtes at the Petit Trianon, was not the mark of a callous ruler, but the desperate escape of a lonely young woman, building a fantasy world to endure a gilded cage. The infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," was a piece of black propaganda, attributed to her decades before her arrival in France, yet it became the indelible stamp on her reputation. By 1789, She was the perfect scapegoat, foreign, female, and royal. But by the summer of 1793, that frivolous girl was long dead. In her place was a 37-year-old widow who had buried her eldest son, seen her husband beheaded, and spent 2 years imprisoned with her surviving children, Marie-Thérèse and Louis-Charles, under the ever-watchful eyes of her jailers. She had already lost a kingdom. The revolutionaries were now intent on proving she could lose her very humanity. The Temple prison itself was an instrument of psychological pressure. A cold, damp fortress, it was a world of shadows and echoes. Initially, the family was kept together, and Marie Antoinette strove to create a fragile semblance of normalcy, giving lessons, leading prayers, holding her children close, as the sounds of the revolutionary city seeped through the walls. But the guards were not just captors, they were observers, their reports flowing to the Committee of Public Safety. They noted her composure, her quiet dignity, and her fierce, protective focus on her children. And so, the experiments in psychological pressure began. First, they restricted her access to the children's rooms, forcing her to petition for the basic right to see her son and daughter. Then, they placed guards inside their living quarters, men who sat and stared, recording every whispered comfort, every tearful moment. The children were forbidden from speaking German, their mother's native tongue, ensuring no private word escaped state surveillance. The stress began its physical metamorphosis. Her light brown hair started to turn white, a condition now known as calamity subita, but often called Marie Antoinette syndrome. She suffered from severe uterine hemorrhaging, likely a result of immense stress or cancer, which she tried to hide. A final, pathetic grasp at privacy. She was unraveling, but she held on because the core of her being, her children, remained with her. The state decided to remove that core. The seizure of Louis-Charles on July 3rd was only phase 1. The true genius of their cruelty lay in what they did with him. The boy was placed under the so-called guardianship of Antoine Simon, an ill-educated cobbler and hardened revolutionary selected not for wisdom, but for his roughness. His purpose was not to guide the child, but to reshape him, to erase who he had been, and replace him with something useful to the revolution. Louis-Charles was confined to a dark, neglected chamber, isolated from the world he once knew. He was forced into symbols of the new republic, taught to sing songs that insulted the father he had lost, and subjected to a relentless campaign meant to confuse his memories and weaken his identity. Hunger, fear, and intimidation became part of his daily life. Under this pressure, the boy was coached to repeat claims crafted by his captors, statements accusing his mother of crimes she did not commit, allegations designed to shock the public and damage her beyond repair. Terrified and manipulated, the 8-year-old eventually echoed the words they demanded. In doing so, the revolutionaries created the most devastating tool for Marie Antoinette's trial: testimony forged from the suffering of her own child. Isolated and shattered, her fate was already sealed. On August 1st, 1793, at 2 a.m, guards again stormed her room. Without explanation, she was torn from her weeping daughter and sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, denied even a final embrace, and transported to the Conciergerie. This was the antechamber to the guillotine. Here, she was stripped of her last vestige of identity and became prisoner 280. Her cell was a damp, vaulted room, its walls sweating with mold, furnished with a straw pallet, a table, and a chair. A single candle fought the oppressive gloom. The calculated humiliation was meticulous. She was provided a small privacy screen, a cruel piece of theater, for within the cell 2 guards maintained a 24-hour watch. They observed her every move, eating, sleeping, dressing, praying, and using the chamber pot. This constant, unblinking surveillance was not for security. It was a deliberate policy to erase her last claim to interiority, to make her a perpetual object of the state's gaze. Historical accounts describe her sitting motionless for hours, a statue of grief. But at night, the guards reported hearing the endless, whispered mantra, "Louis Charles, Louis Charles," as if the repetition of his name was a spell to keep his memory and her sanity alive. Her health deteriorated rapidly. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her face became gaunt. In 10 weeks, she aged decades. Her trial, which began on October 14, 1793, was a judicial grotesquerie, a performance whose ending was pre-scripted. The Revolutionary Tribunal was packed with a crowd baying for spectacle. The prosecutor, Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, hurled charges of treason, conspiracy with Austria, and orchestrating the famine. Through 2 exhausting days, Marie Antoinette displayed a stunning, steely composure. Pale and emaciated, dressed in her mourning black, she parried the political accusations with clarity and firm intelligence, refusing to be cowed. She admitted to her duties as a wife and mother, but denied being an enemy of the state. Seeing his conventional attacks failing to break her dignified facade, Fouquier-Tinville deployed his manufactured horror. He called the radical journalist Jacques Hébert to the stand. Hébert, with theatrical malice, presented the most monstrous accusation that the Queen had engaged in incest with her young son, Louis Charles. The charge, extracted from a tortured child, hung in the air, a vile pollution. The crowd's bloodthirsty noise hushed. In that silence, Marie Antoinette's impeccable control finally shattered. This was not an attack on the Queen, but on the mother. Rising from her seat, her body trembling not with fear, but with outraged instinct, she turned not to the judges, but to the women in the public galleries. Her voice, charged with an emotion previously suppressed, rang out. "I appeal to all the mothers who are here," she cried. "Is there a mother among you who would not shudder at such an accusation?" It was a masterstroke of humanity, an appeal to a universal truth beyond politics. For a moment, the revolutionary narrative cracked. Some in the crowd were visibly moved, but the machinery of terror was inexorable. The moment of humanity was noted, then discarded. Found guilty in the pre-dawn hours of October 16th, she spent her final hours writing a last letter to Madame Elizabeth. It is a document that utterly refutes the monster of propaganda, filled not with hatred or politics, but with heartbreaking tenderness, forgiveness, and concern for her children. She wrote, "I am calm, as one is when conscience holds no reproach. I deeply regret leaving my poor children. You know that I lived only for them." She implored her son to never seek vengeance for their deaths. In a final, crushing twist of cruelty, the letter was confiscated by her jailers and never delivered. It would lie hidden in archives for decades, a last whisper lost to its intended recipients. The final ritual of degradation began at 11 o'clock. She was forced to change from her mourning dress into a plain white chemise, the uniform of the condemned, under the eyes of her guards. Her white hair was crudely shorn at the nape of her neck. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back with rough rope. Noting the excessive tightness, she offered a quiet, poignant correction. "You did not bind my husband's hands like this." She was then paraded through Paris in an open tumbril, a cart for animal carcasses, subjected to an hour of public vitriol, screaming, and thrown refuse. Sketches from the day show a woman hollowed out by suffering, yet sitting with rigid, unbroken dignity. Upon mounting the scaffold, weakened and blinded by the sun, after months in a dungeon, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Her final words, were an instinctive apology. "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." 20 seconds later, the blade fell. The revolutionaries sought to destroy Marie Antoinette, the symbol of everything they despised. They subjected her to a prolonged, clinical deconstruction of her spirit, weaponizing her maternal love as their primary tool. They stripped her of title, privacy, health, and finally, life. Yet, in their obsession with breaking the queen, they inadvertently unveiled the woman. They revealed not a monster, but a resilient human being. A mother who fought with ferocious love, a widow who faced grotesque accusations with courage, and a person who, at the very precipice of a violent and degrading death, chose to utter a phrase of startling grace. They failed to take her humanity. That was the one thing, in the end, their meticulous cruelty could not extinguish. Her story endures, not as a tale of a wicked queen justly punished, but as a harrowing testament to the depths of political cruelty and the surprising, indomitable fortitude of the human spirit. So we are left with a question that echoes beyond the centuries. After witnessing the systematic unmaking of prisoner 280, how do you see Marie Antoinette now? A villain, a victim, or something far more profoundly human?